In the second half of the 1950s, an attempt was made in the former Soviet Union to partially reform the Stalinist totalitarian system. The processes that were aimed at the liberalization of social and political life, which went down in history as the Khrushchev Thaw, began. Writers and artists who lived in fear for years became active. The initiator of these processes was the leader of the Communist Party, Nikita Khrushchev, at that time, whose life was closely linked with Ukraine. What kind of person was he who decided to expose the cult of personality and eliminate the political system created during the reign of Joseph Stalin? Nikita Khrushchev was born in 1894 in the Kursk province on the ethnic Ukrainian lands of Slobozhanщина. As a teenager, together with his parents, he moved to Ukraine in present-day Donetsk. Here is how this period of his life is described by a professor of the Harvard University, Sergei Plokhin, in his book The Gate of Europe, History of Ukraine, From the Scythian Wars to Independence. Among the Russian peasants, they were attracted by jobs available in Yuzovka, which was dangerous but well paid by the standards of that time, was young Nikita Khrushchev. In 1908, when he was 14, he left the Russian village of Kalinovka, located about 64 kilometers northeast of the Cossack capital, Kharkiv, to join his family in Yuzovka. His father, Sergei, worked as a seasonal worker on the railway in the vicinity of Yuzovka before he moved his family there and got a job in the local mine. He never abandoned, yet never accomplished his dream to save enough money to buy a horse and return to Kalinovka. His son, having no such desires, chose city life and became a mechanic at a mine before joining the Bolshevik Party in mid-1917 and later making for himself a head-spinning political career. Beginning in 1917, he gradually ascended first in the Donbass, then in Moscow. In the 1920s, Khrushchev married the Ukrainian woman Nina Kukharchuk, who was from the Khlom region. At home, she adhered to Ukrainian traditions and tried to make her husband supportive of her people and culture. She was from the Khlom region, born into a Ukrainian family. Under her influence, Khrushchev acquired a certain amount of sympathy for the Ukrainians. By the way, everyone notes that she had a great deal of influence on her husband. He had an image of a Ukrainophile primarily because a significant part of his life was connected with Ukraine. He worked in Donbass party organizations. He held the office of the first secretary of the Communist Party of Ukraine. Moreover, he held that post twice. He even wore an embroidered shirt, so in the given situation, Khrushchev was one who accepted the Ukrainian spirit. He treated Ukrainians favorably despite the fact that he did not have any Ukrainian roots. In 1938, Stalin sent Nikita Khrushchev to Ukraine for him to carry out the less repressive measures which occurred en masse during the Holodomor of 1932-1933 and prepare the republic for the possible breakout of a war. Khrushchev's task was to turn Ukraine into a socialist fortress, and he was chosen to carry out the task of the leader of the peoples. Stalin did not take him seriously. He saw him as a yes-man who was ready to fulfill any order. He did not see him as a good bureaucrat, but at the same time, he did not see him as an opponent or a figure that could pose a threat to him. Stalin's disdainful attitude towards Khrushchev threatened to come back as repressions against him. However, Nikita Sergeyevich managed to avoid reprisals in various ways. Sometimes he could play along with Stalin. For example, everyone knew how the chief of the Kremlin hated Ukraine and Ukrainians, considering them all to be traitors. I have no doubts or objections about the fact that Ukraine was a bone in Stalin's throat. I am sure of that. I know no other people whom he persecuted so consistently and persistently. This is also evident in historic documents. Knowing that, Khrushchev never responded positively about Ukraine and Ukrainians. He was very much attached to creating an image of a Soviet Ukrainian. He wore sharavari embroidered shirts and pretended to know nothing about the modern world, and in that way gave the appearance of being very archaic. But the Russian elder brother was definitely experienced and was a city person who knew what subway and television was, while a Ukrainian was nothing more than an ignorant village peasant. The sense of self-preservation allowed Khrushchev resort to certain tricks. When he realized he could not fulfill the given task, he informed the center and asked for help, attempting to relieve himself of responsibility. That was the case during the fight against the Ukrainian insurgent movement in western Ukraine, when Khrushchev asked for help from Moscow. And it was also the case during the mass hunger of 1947 in Ukraine.
Радянське керівництво тогочасне Khrushchev, Коротченко, будемо казати, і тому подібне.
The Soviet leadership at that time, Khrushchev, Korotchenko, and so on, avoided that punishment because they started appealing to Stalin. They were worried that what happened in 1937-1938 could happen to them. So they started appealing to the leadership, saying that they were in a very difficult situation and could not fulfill the plan. So Stalin sent from Moscow his party companion in arms Lazar Kaganovich, who organized in the 1932-1933 the Holodomor. In other words, Stalin sent his man who was capable of controlling the process because the former thought Khrushchev and Korotchenko were slightly tarnished and were doing everything to somehow tone down Stalin's harshness. Despite this, they did not suffer from the iron-fisted will of the big chief in the Kremlin.
Ті трошки заплямовані, вони все роблять для того, щоб трохи менше. Але вони не постраждали.
During the Second World War, Khrushchev was constantly at the front line in his hotspots in Stalingrad and on the Kursk Bulge. On the day of liberation of Kiev from the German invaders on November 6, 1943, Khrushchev, together with writers Alexander Dovzhenko, Yuri Yanovsky, and Mykola Bazhan, met with the people of Kiev. In the post-war years, he was engaged in the restoration of the ruined economy of Ukraine. Immediately following Stalin's death, Khrushchev turned out to be one of the most influential Soviet leaders who took power into his own hands in the Kremlin in Moscow. Khrushchev realized that only by debunking the cult of Stalin's personality, he could put an end to Stalinism and take power into his own hands. He had to deflate the cult of Stalin's personality and compromise those who were closest to Stalin. Namely, Vyacheslav Molotov, Lazar Kaganovich, and Georgy Malenkov. Before that, Lavrentiy Beria and the others, oriented towards Stalin, were eliminated. It was necessary to clear the way to unlimited power. With the advent of Khrushchev in September 1953, drastic changes in the country's economy began. The changes were mostly related to agricultural production and its accelerated recovery in order to provide people with food. The construction of housing and development of individual regions began. In February 1954, the transfer of the Crimean Peninsula from under the jurisdiction of the Russian Federation to the jurisdiction of Ukraine took place. The key factors were economic feasibility, geography, and historical roots. Crimea, which was cut off from Russia, needed help from mainland Ukraine to restore its economy, which was undermined not only by the war and occupation, but also with the deportation of the Crimean Tatars. One of the main thrusts of the activity of the new leadership was work on liberating the society from the ugliest forms of Stalinist administrative command system. The solution was the creation of new bodies of economic management called economic councils. At the beginning of the liberalization of social and political life, the 20th Congress of the CPSU, which was held in February 1956, was of great importance. In the report on the cult of personality and its consequences, the new leader, Khrushchev, accused Stalin of the organization of mass executions and repressions of innocent people. Stalin and the cult of his personality are no more. For that to be instructive and for that not to be repeated, we must leave such a document for our party, for our descendants. The process of de-Stalinization launched by Khrushchev's speech changed Soviet society. Many former prisoners were politically rehabilitated. Tens of thousands of participants of the Ukrainian nationalist underground and bishops and priests of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church who managed to survive were released from the Stalinist concentration camps. The result of the Khrushchev Thaw in Ukraine was the emergence of a new generation of talented writers and artists who became known as the Sixtiers. They demanded the truth about Stalin's crimes and the renewal of social-political life in the country. They opposed the party's interference in the affairs of literature and art and the free functioning of the Ukrainian language in all spheres of life. Leading personalities in this movement were Mykola Vignorovsky, Ivan Drach, Vitaly Korotych, Lina Kostenko, Vasil Stus, and many others. Khrushchev was convinced that freedom was better than the lack of thereof. He became enraged and resorted to insults when representatives of the creative intelligentsia used freedom not in the way he wanted. Suffice it to recall when Khrushchev visited the exhibition of avant-garde artists in the Manege. It was dedicated to the 30th anniversary of the Moscow branch of the Union of Artists of the USSR. The Soviet leader, who did not understand abstract art at all and considered it hostile, used obscene language against its creators. The same happened to Ukrainian sculptor and film director Ivan Kavalaridze.
Khrushchev, виступаючи на одній із публічних своїх
During one of his public speeches, Khrushchev called Kavalaridze a traitor. Ivan Petrovich wrote a letter to Khrushchev, but there was no answer. Accusing him of treason, Khrushchev formulated it somewhat along these lines. He could be a traitor because he was a formalist in art, that is the main reason. It was a technique to affirm his concept of socialist realism. What Kavalaridze lived for was rejected. The need to look for a new outlook, new shape, which he always found as a sculptor, was rejected.
Заперечувалося те, заради чого жив Кавалерідзе. Заперечувалося необхідність шукати новий погляд, нову форму, яку завжди знаходив. Він як скульптор.
Khrushchev's character was such that he knew how to turn people against himself. He was a rather rude person who was quite intolerant to positions of others and did not coincide with his point of view. Problems in foreign policy arose by the beginning of the mid-60s. Military suppression of the democratic revolution in Hungary in 1956 caused distrust in the Soviet Union from the so-called socialist camp. By placing Soviet missiles in Cuba, Khrushchev created the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, which caused a confrontation with the United States of America. All the internal changes planned by Khrushchev started failing. As a result of ill-considered experiments in agriculture, white bread disappeared from store shelves. The elimination of private household plots led to a significant decrease in the number of livestock. The reforms that were supposed to increase productivity and improve the standard of living in the rural areas of Ukraine led to a rise in the price of products in the cities. There was no dramatic change in economic development. The standard of living of the population went down, putting it on the verge of starvation once again. The manifestation of that was the workers' strike in Novocherkassk in the summer of 1962, against whom weapons were used. According to scholars, reforms that were supposed to change the country did not change the totalitarian Soviet system, since Khrushchev believed in its high purpose.
Khrushchev цього не зробив.
Khrushchev did not do that. He did not dismantle the Soviet totalitarian essence of the regime. He just softened it a little. But why softened? This was deliberately done to prolong the regime in order that it could and would persist. After all, the communism that Khrushchev dreamed about was supposed to grow from that very Soviet system, sustained this ideology. The truth of life and history are on the side of communism. Not only our descendants, but we, comrades, our generation of Soviet people, will live under communism. Our goals are clear: to work, comrades, for the new victories of communism. In October 1964, Khrushchev's entourage removed him from power as a result of the palace coup d'etat. Back then, few of the Soviet citizens could say something good about one of the biggest reformators of the Soviet Union. New leaders organized the coup partly due to the fear that Khrushchev would accuse them of the economic hardships in the country and remove them from power. So they decided to put a stop to those experiments and return to the centralized model of the Soviet economy. The result of what Khrushchev did during his 10 years in power, or 11 years, was that after he was sent into retirement, he was not executed and he was not put into jail. In other words, the world outlook and psychology of leaders had changed. Khrushchev was given a personal pension. He lived out his age in the countryside on the outskirts of Moscow. The removal of Khrushchev from power and his replacement by Leonid Brezhnev, who was more politically flexible and less ideologically motivated, led to the curtailment of Khrushchev's thaw and the renewal of political repression. In Ukraine, the arrests began several months earlier in the summer of 1965. In this new wave of repressions, the KGB targeted young intellectuals from Kiev and Lviv who had begun their literary and cultural activities during the Khrushchev Thaw.